Technical discussion and offer for sale of used alternator brackets. For Audi C5 A6 Quattro 4.2, 2000 to 2004, 4-door, and S6. A video by C5A6parts.com, a division of Old Car Life Extension Systems, OCLES, Inc. We support high-quality used OEM Audi parts. This how-to video is highly structured to your intended benefit, with not all that much video footage, but with emphasis on providing useful information. This approach makes a table of contents viable, which has been placed in the video description below for your convenience. To purchase a used unit, click the relevant link in the video description below. The alternator bracket is a strong, complex casting that serves multiple functions. It houses the oil cooler, which is a heat exchanger for engine oil and coolant. It's also the base onto which the oil filter threads, and it houses the oil pressure sending unit. The alternator bracket is also the weight-bearing attachment point for the passenger side engine mount. On the leftmost side of this image, left of the thread for the oil filter, the engine mount attachment hole is clearly visible. The bracket is strong to withstand oil and coolant pressure, tension from the accessory belt, and the weight of half the engine. It attaches to the engine block with 5 large bolts, all of them 8 mm Allen heads. Of these 5 bolts, the 4 longer ones are 65 mm, while the short one is 40. The strong forces acting on the bracket are why such large bolts are required to attach the alternator bracket to the engine block. Possible reasons for removing the alternator bracket include a coolant leak from the short plastic pipe and failure of the oil cooler. The short plastic coolant pipe connects the oil cooler to the engine block. When this pipe deteriorates, it causes a coolant leak on the passenger side. If your short plastic coolant pipe is broken, you can buy a new Audi unit, but we prefer to upgrade to something more reliable. A creative fabricator has been offering aftermarket aluminum replacement pipes, which is what we prefer to use on our 4.2 cars. Replacing the short coolant pipe requires removing the alternator bracket with everything that implies. Instead of replacing the short coolant pipe, some people dump stop leak into the cooling system. This tends to clog the cooler. To enable access to one of the 5 alternator bracket bolts, we first remove the alternator. In the description of this video is a link to another video on detaching the alternator from the bracket. The short alternator bolt threads into the bracket. If stripped, we'd have to re-tap it, heliocoil it, or replace the bracket. If your alternator bracket is damaged, you can buy a used replacement unit from us. On an alternator bracket removed from one of our engines, we noticed that the lower front had a section ground away. Initially, we assumed it was a flaw on that particular part, but on 2 other identical engines, each alternator bracket had the same indentation. The indentation appears intentional, done by either Audi or the OEM vendor for the alternator bracket. The reason is apparent. Without that modification, the bracket would interfere with the serpentine belt tensioner. Consider these instructions at your own risk and while using your own common sense. As mentioned previously, to enable access to one of the 5 alternator bracket bolts, we first remove the alternator. We drain the coolant since we have to detach the front connection to the long black metal coolant pipe that attaches to the alternator bracket. The cylinder head is removed in this picture. While unnecessary to complete this project, the view provided clearly shows the path of the coolant pipe from the alternator bracket to the rear of the engine. We prefer to also detach the rear of the coolant pipe from the rearmost section of the passenger side of the engine. Both of the bolts that attach the long metal black coolant pipe have a 10 mm head. We're not entirely removing the pipe, just detaching it from the alternator bracket and the engine block. For this reason, the pipe need not be detached from the rear coolant hose at the back of the engine. We sell used long metal black coolant pipes. If yours is damaged, use the link in the description of this video. The most difficult challenge is to access the alternator bracket in the full context of the car. We made the following footage from under our company car with the camera pointing up at the alternator. The alternator is in the lower front passenger side and is blocked by many components. The 4.2 engine compartment is a tight fit out of necessity. Big engine, small car. The car is best put into the service position, which means the bumper comes off and the radiator support moves forward. That is by itself a fair amount of work. After that, we hope you have your radio security code and you know how to enter it. If so, disconnect the battery. You will need a 10 mm wrench for the battery terminals. This video does not cover the preparations in detail. It focuses on how to remove the alternator bracket once you have access. The 10 mm Allen head socket is for removing the bolts holding the actual alternator bracket. The 10 mm hex socket is for the bolts on the coolant pipe. The 8 mm hex socket is for the coolant drainage bolt. We end up with 5 Allen head bolts for the bracket and 2 hex bolts for the long metal black coolant pipe. The 8 mm hex is the coolant drain bolt. The 5 Allen bolts have identical heads, but one of them is slightly shorter in length than the other 4. With the alternator and coolant pipe out of the way, removing the alternator bracket from the engine is simple and easy, only if the engine is out of the car. Otherwise, space is tight. The alternator bracket also rests on the passenger side engine mount, supporting half the weight of the engine. To remove the alternator bracket, the weight of the engine needs to be suspended and the subframe needs to be lowered. We remove the 5 Allen head bolts and get ready to pull the alternator bracket away from the engine. We open the 8 mm hex bolt on the alternator bracket to drain the coolant. Coolant will likely pour out. As for the short plastic coolant pipe held in place by the bracket, it might fall out too. If the coolant pipe has broken into pieces, it's prudent to make sure all of these are retrieved from the engine and oil cooler. One option is to buy off-brand parts. Good luck with that. We have found no aftermarket versions of this part being offered. We hope we are competitively priced, given that we guarantee these parts. If you don't like the part when you receive it, tell us and send it back for a full refund, including shipping charges both ways. No surprise, we prefer that you like and keep what you buy from us. Shipping to anywhere in the U.S. is $20 or so. We hope to be your best option and that you will buy from us. To purchase a used unit, click the relevant link in the video description below. This video is for only one type of part, but we actually offer hundreds of parts for Audi 1998 to 2004 C5 A6 models. We offer body parts, interior trim, exterior trim, electrical, mechanical, even engines and transmissions. We specialize in the ZF 5HP 24A automatic Tiptronic transmissions for the 4.2 V8 models. Our website features informative and how-to technical articles and, of course, our used parts store. Visit us today. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more videos like this.